TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations. Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. Israel launches separate ground operations throughout the Gaza Strip. The U.S. State Department notes that proposals for an extended Gaza ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages remains on the table. The U.S. military Central Command continues to pound the Iranian-proxy Ansar-Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi Tribe in Yemen. Jerusalem leveled an unequivocal warning to the residents of the Gaza Strip. Unless Hamas releases the remaining 59 hostages held in captivity and relinquishes control of the enclave, Gaza will face complete destruction and devastation.
Residents of Gaza, this is the last warning. The first sin war destroyed Gaza, and the second sin war will destroy it completely. The Air Force strikes against Hamas terrorists was only the first step. What is coming will be significantly harsher, and you will pay the price. Soon, the evacuation of residents from combat zones will begin again. If they don't return the Israeli hostages and Hamas is not being removed from Gaza, Israel will act with force like you haven't seen before. Take the advice of the U.S. President, return the hostages and get rid of Hamas, and new opportunities will open, including leaving to other places in the world for whoever wants to. The alternative is complete destruction and devastation.
The IDF spokesperson's unit announced that in the past 24 hours, IDF forces launched focused ground operations in the central and southern Gaza Strip. The objective is to expand the security area and partially bisect the terror-ridden enclave from north to south. Among other operational activities, IDF forces have already regained full control of the area up to the center of the Netzarim corridor. And while preparations ahead of a high-intensity ground maneuver are underway, the Israel Air Force conducted dozens of intelligence-directed strikes against Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror operatives and infrastructure. Meanwhile, the IDF spokesperson's unit responded to high casualty claims, which international media outlets echoed from Gazan health authorities, which are run by the Islamist Hamas.
We're operating against a terror organization that killed and kidnapped our civilians, that is hiding behind their civilians on purpose, and that has time and time again in this war lied about numbers of casualties and also about their identity. They present terrorists as civilians. This is something we've seen time and time again. We committed our strikes against those terrorists, against dozens of terrorist targets, against dozens of terrorists who were planning attacks against the state of Israel, and I can assure you we, throughout this campaign since day one, and even just yesterday, we put out warnings for civilians, giving up the element of surprise where we're about to operate. We carry out every measure we can to make sure that we are fighting Hamas and not the people of Gaza.
It is important to know that the Islamist Hamas launched 3 projectiles toward Israeli communities in central Israel. Nevertheless, Israel's aerial defense array intercepted 1 incoming projectile, while 2 additional rockets fell in open areas. Thankfully, no direct injuries or material damage were reported. Turning to a base of the Border Police Hamas Special Operations Unit in Judea-Samaria, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, accompanied by senior commanders both of the IDF and Israel Border Police, observed a special operations exercise amid intensifying counter-terror operations against pockets of Islamist terrorism, which receives backing from the Islamic Republic of Iran, with chief focus on the northern Samaria region.
I am here visiting at the Judea and Samaria undercover Hamas unit base. They are our vanguard. They infiltrate, surprise the terrorist enemy, and deal with them. They simply do sacred work on behalf of the State of Israel. This is always important, and it is especially important now, because as we are waging an intense war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, we are aware of the possibility that another larger and more intense front could be opened here in Judea and Samaria. Therefore, the work of the Border Police Unit, the Israel Police, and the IDF, in cooperation of those three with our special units, has led to many results on behalf of your security, citizens of Israel.
Meanwhile, in Washington, U.S. State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce responded to a question over Hamas claims of a high number of civilian casualties amid the restart of high-intensity military operations in the Gaza Strip.
There was a ceasefire and it was broken by, you want apocalyptic, by the massacre of 1,200 people, the taking of over 250 hostages, remaining hostages that still are in unknown conditions. Certainly Idan Alexander deserves to be free, and he still is not. So when we think about why we're in this situation, let us not forget. We talk about never forgetting certain things that happen, and it's important to keep reminding people of the things what sparked this, the obscenity of October 7th, the obscenity of this wholesale massacre that was videotaped, involving the slaughter of children, of babies, of women being raped as then they're murdered while they're being raped in front of some things are so difficult we choose to not think about them or hold them in our consciousness because we can't. But in this situation, it is a mistake to look at dynamics within a section of what has occurred and remember the history of what has led us here and the extraordinary surprise at the American approach, the Trump approach, to try something new because this can't continue.
The State Department spokeswoman further responded to a question about whether the U.S. proposals, which Hamas had rejected, remain on the table.
It's not that anything is off the table. It is about adhering to what the bridge would be, what would have been, and that is something that can still happen. So that's what we hope for. It's why we do this, right? It's wanting to have that and to try to forestall saying no and going back to the old dynamic. So when you've worked hard on an issue and it's a proposal that's been made, that certainly is something that can be revisited.
Meanwhile, in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron hosted Jordan's King Abdullah II, during the course of which the two heads of state seized the opportunity to rebuke Israel over the resumption of hostilities in the Gaza Strip.
La reprise des frappes israéliennes hier, malgré les efforts des...
The resumption of Israeli strikes yesterday, in spite of the efforts of mediators, is a tragic step backwards, tragic for the people of Gaza, plunged into the terror of the bombing once more, tragic for the hostages and for their families living in the nightmare of uncertainty and a wait for their release, which we want more than anything. Tragic for the whole region, which is trying to get over a year of war and upheaval. Hostilities must stop immediately and negotiations must resume in good faith under the auspices of the United States, responsible for the first ceasefire. We are calling for a permanent end to the hostilities and the release of all hostages.
As you had pointed out, Israel's resumption of its attacks on Gaza is an extremely dangerous step that adds further devastation to an already dire humanitarian situation. The international community must act immediately and collectively push for restoring the ceasefire and the implementation of its phases. Israel's attacks and its blockade of aid, water, and electricity to Gaza are escalatory measures that risk the lives of a severely vulnerable population. The ceasefire must be restored and the flow of aid must resume immediately.
It is important to point out that while the Jordanian monarch focused his condemnations exclusively on Israel, failing to mention the Islamist Hamas even once, President Macron, on the other hand, did also raise the Islamist terror group's blatant hostage diplomacy, which has essentially brought about the Gaza Strip's ruin.
Une politique inhumaine d'otages n'a jamais assuré...
An inhumane hostage policy has never brought about a military or a political victory. Hamas has been beaten, having contributed to the most serious disaster to happen to the Palestinians since 1948. They are without the sponsor that pushed them to the crimes of October 7th. The acts of resistance is an illusion now. By the same token, there will be no Israeli military solution in Gaza, any more than colonization, annexation, or forced displacement might provide a solution for the trauma of October 7th. We need to find our way, a political solution, and those elements are on the table today.
Et ces éléments sont aujourd'hui sur la table.
Meanwhile, in Tehran, the Islamic Republic's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who claimed that the Islamist Hamas was victorious versus Israel and that his regime will continue to support the Islamist terror groups fighting the Jewish state and the United States in the region, conveniently claimed both Israel and the United States were to blame for the resumption of hostilities in the Gaza Strip.
The renewed attack by the usurping Zionist regime on Gaza is a very huge crime and a catastrophic tragedy. The Islamic community must stand united against this. They should set aside their differences on various issues. This matter is a matter for the entire Islamic community. Of course, America also shares responsibility for this tragedy. Those who have political insight in the world, all of them believe that this action was carried out either at the behest of America or at least with America's green light. Therefore, America is also complicit in this crime.
Ayatollah Khamenei went on to also claim that the American military campaign against his proxy in Yemen, namely Ansar-Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi Tribe, was also an American crime that must be prevented.
The strikes in Yemen are the same way. This attack on the people of Yemen, on Yemeni civilians, is also a crime that must absolutely be prevented.
Khamenei conveniently stopped short, of course, from noting that the Houthis have disrupted freedom of navigation in the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb since October 17th of 2023 on Iranian directives, and he also refrained from acknowledging the Ayatollah regime's material and operational support for the Houthis altogether. Nevertheless, the U.S. military's Central Command is seemingly unimpressed by the outcry of the Ayatollah regime, announcing that CENTCOM forces continue 24/7 operations against the Iranian-backed Houthis. Separately, U.S. President Donald Trump announced yesterday that while Iran has lessened its intensity on military equipment and general support to the Houthis, they're still sending large levels of supplies. Therefore, President Trump stressed, Iran must stop the sending of these supplies immediately and let the Houthis fight it out themselves. President Trump continued by stressing unequivocally that either way, they will lose. It is important to know that the Houthis have once again launched a ballistic missile towards Israel early this morning. Nevertheless, thankfully, the Israel Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense once again successfully intercepted the incoming projectile outside Israeli territorial skies. Nonetheless, the Houthis claimed that their mission was somehow successful.
The missile force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a qualitative military operation targeting Ben Gurion Airport in the occupied Jaffa region with a Palestine II hypersonic ballistic missile. This operation successfully achieved its objective, thanks be to Allah.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. TV7 Israel is a non-profit ministry with all of our productions exclusively reliant on your generosity. Therefore, if you're blessed by the content of our programs, I would like to encourage you, support TV7 Israel with a donation. You can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Separately, I'd also like to encourage you as ever, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and God willing, we will see you during our next update. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.